I could feel the shovel hit something hard beneath the red clay soil, and my heart nearly stopped. After 3 months of digging test holes across the cursed 100-acre plot I'd bought for practically nothing, I'd finally found what I was looking for: gold, just like in my previous life. My stepmother, Patricia, had laughed until she cried when I told the family I was spending my entire inheritance on the abandoned Blackwood property. "That girl has finally lost her mind," she'd wheezed to my half-sister Veronica. "Throwing away $200,000 on a patch of dirt that's been sitting empty for 30 years. Even the state won't touch it." But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that in my first life, I died at 25 in a car accident on my way to meet a geologist who'd discovered something extraordinary about that land. They didn't know I'd been reborn with every memory intact, given a second chance to claim what should have been mine all along. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very family who'd spent years calling me worthless was about to watch me become wealthier than they'd ever dreamed. Growing up in the Morrison household had been a masterclass in psychological warfare. My father had remarried Patricia when I was 8, bringing her 17-year-old daughter, Veronica, into our home like a conquering queen. From that moment on, I became invisible. Every family photo featured the three of them: Patricia's manicured hands on Dad's shoulders, Veronica's perfect smile gleaming in designer clothes I'd never be allowed to wear. I was either cropped out entirely or relegated to the far edge, an afterthought in my own family. When I turned 16 and asked for driving lessons, Patricia had scoffed. "Veronica needs a car for college. We can't afford to insure 2 teenagers." But somehow they'd found money for Veronica's BMW, her designer prom dress, her spring break trips to Cabo. I worked 3 part-time jobs through high school while Veronica got an allowance that exceeded my monthly earnings. When I graduated valedictorian, they skipped my ceremony to attend Veronica's boyfriend's lacrosse game. When I earned a full scholarship to State University, Patricia had rolled her eyes and said, "Well, at least we won't have to pay for that mistake." The real cruelty came when my maternal grandmother died during my sophomore year of college. She'd left me her entire estate, $200,000 in the family jewelry that had been passed down for generations. I was devastated by her loss, but grateful for her final gift, a chance at independence. That's when Patricia showed her true colors. "Your grandmother was clearly suffering from dementia," she'd announced at the reading of the will. "No rational person leaves everything to a 20-year-old instead of helping the family who's been supporting her." She'd hired lawyers, contested the will, dragged the case through probate for 2 years. In the end, I kept the money, but the legal fees had eaten through half of it, and the family jewelry had mysteriously gone missing from grandmother's house before I could claim it. "You should be thanking us," Patricia had said with that cold smile of hers. "This taught you that money doesn't just fall into your lap. You have to fight for everything in this world." She was right about fighting. She just didn't realize I was about to start. The night before my death in my previous life, I'd been researching investment properties online when I'd stumbled across a geological survey from the 1980s. The Blackwood property had been tested for mineral deposits after a small-scale mining operation had found trace amounts of gold in the nearby creek. The survey had been inconclusive, labeled the land potentially valuable, but requiring extensive excavation to verify deposits. The mining company had gone bankrupt before they could follow up, and the land had sat empty ever since. Local rumors claimed it was cursed. 3 different development companies had tried to build on it over the decades, and each had faced bizarre accidents, financial ruin, or family tragedies that forced them to abandon their plans. But I'd found something else in my research that night: a follow-up report from 1995 that had been buried in county records, written by a geologist named Dr. Helena Reeves. She'd done independent core samples across the property and found what she called significant gold deposits concentrated in the northeastern quadrant, likely worth several $1,000,000 at current market prices. I'd been driving to meet Dr. Reeves the next morning when a drunk driver had run a red light and ended my life. Now, 3 years later, I was 23 again, with a second chance and every memory of my previous research intact. Dr. Reeves was retired but still lived in the county. The land was still available, still cheap, still cursed. And my family still had no idea what they were dealing with. The decision to buy the Blackwood property had been the easiest choice of my second life. I'd spent months in my previous life researching mineral rights, environmental surveys, and extraction permits. I knew exactly which lawyers to hire, which geological firms to contact, and how to structure the purchase to maintain full mineral rights. But first, I had to endure the family meeting from hell. Absolutely not, my father had said when I'd announced my plans over Sunday dinner. I won't let you throw away your inheritance on some fantasy. It's my money, I'd replied calmly, cutting into my pot roast. Grandmother left it to me specifically. Patricia had laughed that razor-sharp laugh of hers. Sweetheart, you're 23 years old with no business experience, no real-world knowledge, and apparently no common sense. That land has been sitting empty for 30 years for a reason. Multiple reasons, Veronica had added, not looking up from her phone. Everyone knows that place is cursed. Remember the Hendersons? They tried to build their dream house there in 2018 and their entire foundation cracked overnight. Cost them $200,000 in repairs before they gave up. And the Yamato Corporation, Patricia had continued, warming to her theme. International development company with unlimited resources, and they couldn't make that land work either. What makes you think a college dropout with delusions of grandeur can succeed where they failed? I'd set down my fork and smiled. Maybe I know something they didn't. The truth was, I knew everything they didn't. I knew the Hendersons had built directly over an underground spring that wouldn't show up on standard geological surveys. I knew Yamato Corporation had pulled out not because of any curse, but because their primary investor had been arrested for embezzlement halfway through the project. I knew that every cursed incident associated with the land had perfectly rational explanations that had nothing to do with supernatural forces. Most importantly, I knew exactly where to dig. The purchase had taken 6 weeks to complete. During that time, Patricia had staged what she called interventions, family meetings designed to talk me out of my obsession. She'd brought in financial advisors, real estate agents, even a therapist she claimed specialized in impulse control disorders. This is clearly a psychological response to your grandmother's death, the therapist had explained during our one session. You're trying to honor her memory by making a grand gesture, but you're actually dishonoring her sacrifice by throwing away the security she wanted to provide for you. I'd nodded politely and signed the purchase agreement the next day. The look on Patricia's face when I'd handed her the deed had been worth every penny of the inheritance. Pure, unadulterated rage mixed with the dawning realization that she'd lost control of the narrative. For the first time in 15 years, I'd made a major life decision without her permission, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. Fine, she'd said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. Waste your money. But don't come crying to us when you're living in a trailer on that worthless piece of dirt, wondering where your life went wrong. I wouldn't dream of it, I'd replied. That had been 3 months ago. 3 months of back-breaking work, of getting up before dawn to survey the land before heading to my job at the county planning office. 3 months of careful excavation, following the geological markers I remembered from Dr. Reeves' report. 3 months of enduring Patricia's smug text messages asking if I'd come to my senses yet. Today, all of that was about to change. I pulled the object from the soil and held it up to the late afternoon sun. It was a gold nugget roughly the size of a golf ball, its surface gleaming despite decades underground. According to Dr. Reeves' calculations, this was just the beginning, the tip of a massive deposit that stretched across nearly 20 acres of my property. My phone rang. Patricia's contact photo filled the screen. A selfie she'd taken at Veronica's college graduation, where she'd made sure to position herself front and center while I'd been relegated to holding everyone's purses. Hello, Mother, I answered, not bothering to hide my smile. Don't you mother me, she snapped. I just got off the phone with your father. He says you've been ignoring his calls about Thanksgiving. Veronica's boyfriend is coming this year, and we need to discuss sleeping arrangements. I'll be busy on Thanksgiving, I said, running my thumb across the gold nugget's surface. I'm having the property surveyed by a team from Colorado. Something about mineral assessments. There was a pause. Mineral assessments? Oh, yes. Apparently there might be something valuable under all this cursed dirt. Who would have thought? Another pause, longer this time. What kind of valuable? I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head. Patricia had always had a sixth sense for money, an instinct for sniffing out opportunity wherever it might hide. It's what had attracted her to my father in the first place. a widower with a successful accounting practice, and a young daughter who could be easily managed. I probably shouldn't say anything yet, I replied, injecting just the right note of uncertainty into my voice. The preliminary test could be wrong, but Dr. Reeves seems very excited about the possibilities. Dr. Reeves? The geologist who's been helping me. She says she's never seen mineral samples quite like these from this area. Something about the geological formation being perfect for certain types of deposits. I could hear Patricia breathing heavily on the other end. What types of deposits? Like I said, I probably shouldn't speculate, but if she's right, I let the sentence hang in the air like a baited hook. If she's right, what? Well, let's just say I might not be living in a trailer after all. The call ended abruptly. I stared at my phone for a moment, then burst into laughter. Patricia had always been predictable in her greed, and I'd just given her exactly enough information to drive her crazy with curiosity and regret. But this was only the beginning of my plan. Over the next 2 weeks, I executed the most carefully orchestrated campaign of my 2 lifetimes. I knew my family's weaknesses, their pressure points, their desperate need to be involved in anything that might make them money. I played them like a violin. First, I hired Morrison and Associates, my father's own accounting firm, to handle the tax implications of my potential mineral discovery. I made sure to schedule the appointment during his busiest day, when Patricia would be at the office helping with year-end bookkeeping. So, Dad had said, trying to maintain professional composure while his wife sat beside him, practically vibrating with curiosity. You need guidance on reporting mineral extraction income? If it comes to that, I'd replied, spreading geological surveys across his desk. Dr. Reeves believes we're looking at significant deposits. She's bringing in a team from the Colorado School of Mines to do comprehensive core sampling next month. Patricia had leaned forward, studying the papers with hungry eyes. These look very technical. They are. Apparently, the geological formation under my property is quite rare in this part of the state. Something about ancient riverbeds and volcanic activity creating perfect conditions for mineral concentration. What kind of minerals? Dad had asked, his professional mask slipping slightly. I'd shrugged. Dr. Reeves mentioned several possibilities: copper, silver. I'd paused for effect. Gold. The word had hung in the air like a physical presence. I'd watched my father's pupils dilate, seen Patricia's breathing become shallow and quick. Gold, she'd repeated, potentially. The initial samples were promising, but we won't know for sure until the full survey is complete. I'd gathered up the papers and stood. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure I was prepared for any tax implications. Dr. Reeves says that if her estimates are correct, I'll need to set up a mining corporation and file for extraction permits. Estimates? Dad's voice had cracked slightly on the word. I probably shouldn't say. The numbers could be completely wrong. What numbers? Patricia had demanded. I'd hesitated, as if debating whether to share sensitive information. Well, she thinks the deposit might be worth anywhere from $5 to $15 million. The silence that followed had been deafening. Million? Patricia had whispered. But like I said, that's just a preliminary estimate based on core samples from 3 locations. The actual extraction value could be much lower or higher. I'd shrugged again. I guess we'll find out. I'd left them sitting there in stunned silence, knowing that within hours the entire extended family would know about my discovery. Phase 2 had involved Veronica, and it had been almost too easy. My half-sister had always been beautiful, popular, and utterly convinced that the world owed her everything she wanted. She'd sailed through life on her looks and her mother's manipulation, never developing any real skills or work ethic. At 26, she was already on her second marriage to a man who made good money but not great money, certainly not enough to support her expensive tastes indefinitely. I'd known she would come to me within days of hearing about the gold, and I'd been ready. Maya, she'd called, jogging across the Blackwood property in designer hiking boots that had probably never seen actual dirt before. I was hoping I'd find you here. I'd looked up from the latest test hole I'd been digging, making sure she could see the small collection of gold flakes I'd already extracted and placed in a clear jar on my folding table. Veronica, what brings you out to the cursed wasteland? She'd laughed, that tinkling sound she made when she wanted something. Oh, you know I never believed in all that superstition. I actually think it's amazing what you're doing here. So brave. So entrepreneurial. I'd wiped sweat from my forehead and waited. Veronica had never called me brave or entrepreneurial in her life. She was building up to something. Mom told me about the geological surveys, she'd continued, moving closer to peer at the gold flakes. This is so exciting. I had no idea you were sitting on a gold mine. Literally. It's still very preliminary, I'd said, echoing the line I'd given our parents. Could turn out to be nothing, but it could turn out to be something amazing. Her eyes had been bright with avarice as she'd stared at the jar. Maya, I have to ask you something, and I hope you won't take this the wrong way. Here it comes, I thought. I know we haven't always been as close as we could have been, she'd continued, which was her way of acknowledging 15 years of treating me like hired help. But we're family, you know? And I've been thinking, this is such a huge project for one person to handle alone. I'm managing fine so far. But what about the business side? The marketing, the investor relations, the corporate structure? She gestured vaguely at the test holes. You're obviously brilliant at the technical stuff, but running a mining operation is going to require so many different skill sets. I'd raised an eyebrow. Are you offering to help? Well, I do have my MBA in business administration, and James has connections in the investment world through his firm. We could bring so much to the table: professional expertise, startup capital, networking opportunities. In exchange for what? She'd smiled that megawatt smile that had been getting her what she wanted since childhood. We could be partners, split everything equally, pool our resources, build something incredible together. I'd pretended to consider this. Equally? As in, you and James would provide half the investment capital? Her smile had faltered slightly. Well, we'd contribute our expertise and connections, which are arguably more valuable than just money. So you want me to give you half of my land, half of my mineral rights, and half of any profits in exchange for your business advice? When you put it like that, it sounds... She had trailed off, perhaps realizing how ridiculous her proposal actually was. It sounds like you want something for nothing, I'd finished, which, now that I think about it, is pretty much how our relationship has always worked. Her mask had slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Maya, be reasonable. You can't possibly handle a multi-million-dollar mining operation by yourself. You'll need help, and we're family. We should be helping each other. Where was this family loyalty when I was working 3 jobs to pay for college while you got a brand new car for your 16th birthday? That's ancient history. Where was it when you borrowed my prom dress and returned it with wine stains all over the front? I was 17. Where was it when you told everyone at your wedding that I was your half-sister from Dad's previous marriage instead of just your sister? She'd stood there for a long moment, clearly trying to decide whether to continue the manipulation or abandon it for outright hostility. She'd chosen hostility. Fine, she'd snapped. Be selfish, but don't come crying to me when you're in over your head and need real help. I wouldn't dream of it, I'd replied, unconsciously echoing the words I'd said to Patricia months earlier. She'd stormed off, leaving me alone with my gold flakes and my growing sense of satisfaction. 2 down, 1 to go. My father had been the most challenging target, simply because he'd been the most genuinely conflicted about our family dynamics. Unlike Patricia and Veronica, who'd embraced their roles as my tormentors with enthusiasm, Dad had always seemed vaguely uncomfortable with how I'd been treated. Not uncomfortable enough to actually change anything, but uncomfortable enough to occasionally throw me small bones. A birthday dinner just for the 2 of us, helping with college application fees, defending my choice to study geology instead of something more practical. I'd known that appealing to his guilt would be more effective than appealing to his greed. The opportunity had come when he'd called to invite me to Sunday dinner, ostensibly to clear the air after my conversations with Patricia and Veronica. I think there might have been some misunderstandings, he'd said over the phone. Your stepmother and sister feel like you've been secretive about your project. They're hurt that you don't want to include them. Are they hurt, Dad? Or are they upset that they can't control me anymore? There had been a long pause. Maya, I know things haven't always been perfect in our family. Perfect? I'd laughed, but there'd been no humor in it. Dad, I spent 15 years being treated like a stranger in my own home. Patricia made it clear from day one that I was an inconvenience, a reminder of your life before her. And you let her. That's not, I tried to balance everyone's needs. You tried to keep the peace. There's a difference. I'd taken a deep breath, preparing for the conversation I'd wanted to have for years. Do you know what I remember most about growing up? It's not the big dramatic moments. It's the little daily reminders that I didn't belong. Maya. Like how family photos were always arranged so I was slightly behind everyone else or cropped out entirely. How my achievements were mentioned in passing while Veronica's were celebrated with elaborate parties. How my opinion was never asked for on major family decisions, but her boyfriend's preferences determined our vacation destinations. I'd heard him sigh heavily. I know I wasn't perfect. I'm not asking for perfect, Dad. I'm asking you to acknowledge what actually happened. For 15 years, you chose Patricia's comfort and Veronica's happiness over your own daughter's well-being. Every single time. Another long pause. What do you want me to say? I want you to say that you understand why I don't trust any of you with something this important to me. I want you to say that you understand why I'm not interested in family partnerships with people who've spent decades treating me like I don't matter. You do matter. I matter now because I might be rich. Where was this concern when I was eating ramen noodles for dinner because I couldn't afford groceries and textbooks in the same month? The silence stretched between us for nearly a minute. You're right, he'd finally said, his voice quiet and strained. I failed you. I failed you in ways that I'm only starting to understand, and I don't know how to make up for that. It had been the first time in my life, either life, that he'd ever admitted fault without immediately following it with excuses or justifications. I don't need you to make up for anything, I'd said, and I'd meant it. I just need you to understand that the way I'm handling this situation is a direct result of how our family has operated for the past 15 years. Are you saying you'll never forgive us? I'd considered the question seriously. I'm saying that forgiveness is something you earn through changed behavior, not something you get just by asking for it. And so far, the only thing that's changed is that you all think I might have something you want. The call had ended on that note, leaving him to wrestle with his conscience while I continued my excavation work. But the real fireworks had started when Dr. Helena Reeves arrived with her team from the Colorado School of Mines. I'd found Dr. Reeves exactly where I'd expected her to be, retired but still consulting, living in a modest house 20 minutes from the university where she'd taught for 30 years. When I'd called her about the Blackwood property, she'd been skeptical at first. I surveyed that land back in the 90s, she'd said over the phone. Found some promising indicators, but nothing definitive. Has something changed? I've been doing some amateur excavation, I'd replied. Found a few things that might interest you. When I'd shown her the gold nuggets I'd extracted from various test holes across the property, her skepticism had evaporated instantly. My God, she'd breathed, holding one of the larger specimens up to her desk lamp. Where exactly did you find this? I'd shown her my carefully mapped excavation sites, each one corresponding perfectly to the coordinates from her original survey. She'd stared at the map for a long time, then looked back at the gold. You know, I always suspected there was more here than my initial survey revealed. The geological markers were all there, ancient stream beds, the right kind of rock formations, evidence of volcanic activity that could have concentrated heavy metals in specific areas. What stopped you from doing more extensive testing? She'd smiled ruefully. Funding. Academic geology departments don't exactly have budgets for speculative excavation projects, especially on private land. I wrote up my findings and recommendations, but without a commercial backer. She'd shrugged. What if you had backing now? That question had led to our current arrangement. Dr. Reeves would bring a full survey team to conduct comprehensive geological mapping and core sampling across the entire property. In exchange, I would pay all expedition costs plus a consulting fee, with the understanding that she would have first right of refusal on any future extraction planning. The team had arrived on a Tuesday morning in 3 university vehicles loaded with equipment I recognized from my previous life's research core sampling rigs, mineral analysis equipment, ground-penetrating radar systems. Dr. Reeves had assembled a team of 6 graduate students and 2 postdoctoral researchers, all of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else until they saw my preliminary gold samples. Holy shit, one of the grad students had muttered, earning a sharp look from Dr. Reeves. Language, Marcus, but yes, these are quite remarkable specimens. They'd spent the first day mapping the property and identifying optimal drilling sites based on geological surveys and my own excavation data. By day 2, they'd confirmed what I already knew. We were sitting on one of the largest undiscovered gold deposits in the state. The concentration is extraordinary, Dr. Reeves had told me, as we'd stood watching her team extract core samples from the northeastern section of the property. Based on what we're seeing, this could be a $40 to $60 million deposit. I'd tried to look surprised. 60 million? Possibly more. The gold seems to be concentrated in 3 main veins running roughly parallel to the old creek bed. If the entire deposit is as rich as these samples suggest, she'd shaken her head in amazement. Maya, you found something truly exceptional here. Word had traveled fast. By Thursday, my phone had been ringing constantly with calls from Patricia, Veronica, my father, and several relatives I hadn't heard from in years. I'd ignored them all, focusing instead on the scientific confirmation of what I'd already known. On Friday, Dr. Reeves had called a press conference. I'd tried to talk her out of it, knowing that publicity would complicate everything, but she'd been adamant. This is a significant geological discovery, she'd insisted. The academic community needs to know about it, and the proper authorities need to be notified for environmental and regulatory purposes. So on Friday afternoon, I'd found myself standing beside Dr. Reeves in front of 3 local news crews, 2 newspaper reporters, and several representatives from the State Geological Survey, watching her announce that the cursed Blackwood property contained one of the most significant gold deposits discovered in this region in the past 50 years. The questions had come fast and furious. Miss Morrison, how does it feel to discover that you're sitting on a fortune? What are your plans for extraction? Is it true that multiple companies have tried and failed to develop this land over the years? Do you believe in the curse that's supposedly attached to this property? I'd answered as diplomatically as possible, emphasizing that everything was still preliminary and that I was committed to responsible development that would benefit the entire community. But I'd seen the look in the reporters' eyes, the hunger for a story that had all the elements they loved. A young woman, a family inheritance, a cursed property, and hidden treasure. By that evening, the story had been picked up by state news outlets. By Saturday morning, it had gone viral on social media, and by Saturday afternoon, my family had shown up at my property uninvited. I'd been reviewing extraction permits in my trailer when I'd heard multiple car doors slamming outside. Through the window, I'd seen Patricia's BMW, Veronica's SUV, and my father's sedan parked in a neat row near my excavation site. They'd approached as a united front, which would have been touching if it hadn't been so obviously calculated. Maya, Patricia had called out, her voice syrupy with false warmth. Sweetheart, we saw the news. This is incredible. Absolutely incredible, Veronica had echoed, practically bouncing with excitement. You're famous. We're so proud of you. My father had hung back slightly, his expression more cautious than celebratory. What are you all doing here? I'd asked, not bothering to hide my suspicion. We came to congratulate you, Patricia had said, moving closer to peer at the geological equipment scattered around my work area. And to discuss next steps. Next steps? Well, obviously you can't handle a project this large by yourself, Veronica had jumped in. You'll need lawyers, accountants, marketing specialists, investor relations. All things we can help with, Patricia had finished smoothly. We're family, Maya. We should be working together on this. I'd stared at them for a long moment, these people who'd spent decades making it clear that I was barely tolerated in their presence, now suddenly eager to be part of my success. Working together, I'd repeated. Like we worked together when you contested grandmother's will? Patricia's smile had flickered. That was different. Like we worked together when you needed someone to babysit Veronica's kids for free every weekend while she went to spa retreats? Maya, that's not fair. Like we worked together when I asked for help with college application fees, and you said I needed to learn to stand on my own 2 feet? The mask had begun to slip. I'd seen flashes of the real Patricia underneath. calculating, cold, furious at being challenged. "You're being dramatic," she'd said, her voice tighter now. "Yes, we've had our differences, but this is bigger than petty family squabbles. This is about building something together, about securing everyone's future." "Everyone's future?" I'd laughed. "You mean your future? You want to ride my success after spending years telling me I was worthless?" "We never said you were worthless. You said I was a mistake that Dad couldn't afford to make twice. You said I was lucky anyone could stand to live with me. You said I would never amount to anything because I didn't have what it takes to succeed in the real world." Veronica had shifted uncomfortably. "Maya, you're taking things out of context." "Am I?" "Because I remember every word, Veronica. I remember you telling your friends that I was just the practice daughter before Dad figured out how to raise kids properly. I remember you borrowing my scholarship money to pay for your spring break trip because you said I owed the family for supporting me." The silence that had followed had been deafening. "What do you want from us?" my father had finally asked, his voice quiet and resigned. "I want you to leave," I'd said simply. "I want you to go back to your lives and pretend I don't exist, just like you did for the first 23 years of mine." "You can't be serious," Patricia had sputtered. "You're going to cut off your own family over ancient history?" "I'm going to protect myself from people who've never shown me anything but contempt. The only thing that's changed is that now you think I can be useful to you." "Maya, please," Veronica had tried once more. "We can all benefit from this. There's enough success here for everyone." "You're right," I'd agreed. "There is enough success here for everyone who actually contributed to it. That would be me, Dr. Reeves, and her research team. The rest of you contributed nothing but obstacles and discouragement." Patricia's composure had finally cracked completely. "You ungrateful little bitch," she'd hissed. "After everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me?" I'd interrupted. "Name one thing, one single thing you've done that benefited me instead of yourselves." She'd opened and closed her mouth several times, clearly struggling to come up with an answer. "That's what I thought," I'd said. "Now get off my property." They'd left in a convoy of righteous indignation, but I'd known they weren't done. People like Patricia didn't give up when $60 million was at stake. I'd been right. The legal papers had been served on Tuesday morning, a lawsuit filed by Patricia Morrison and Veronica Martinez, claiming I had misappropriated family resources and hidden assets related to the mineral discovery. They were seeking an injunction to halt all development on the property pending a full family court review of my inheritance and mineral rights. I'd read through the filing with a growing sense of amusement. They were claiming that because I'd used my inheritance to purchase the land, and because the inheritance had come from family assets, my grandmother's estate, any profits from the property should be considered community property, subject to equitable distribution among all family members. It was legally absurd, completely without merit, and exactly the kind of desperate overreach I'd expected from them. I'd called my lawyer, not my father's firm, but a mineral rights specialist I'd researched extensively, and scheduled an emergency meeting. "This is frivolous," Jennifer Hawkins had said after reviewing the paperwork. "They have no legal standing whatsoever. Your inheritance was properly probated, the land purchase was entirely legitimate, and mineral rights are clearly specified in your deed. How long will it take to get this dismissed?" 2 weeks, maybe 3, but Maya..." She'd looked at me seriously. "This kind of family litigation can get ugly. Are you prepared for that?" I'd thought about all the years of psychological warfare, all the subtle and not so subtle ways my family had undermined my confidence and self-worth. I've been preparing for this my entire life. The hearing had been scheduled for the following Thursday. In the meantime, I'd had work to do. Dr. Reeves and her team had completed their comprehensive survey, confirming that the deposit was even larger than initially estimated. The total extractable value was now projected at somewhere between $70 and $90 million, depending on market conditions and extraction efficiency. I'd also been approached by 3 different mining companies interested in partnership deals. After careful consideration, I'd chosen Meridian Mining, a Colorado-based firm with an excellent environmental record and a profit-sharing model that would allow me to maintain majority ownership while they handled the technical aspects of extraction. But the most satisfying development had come when I'd received a call from my father. Maya, he'd said, his voice strained and tired, I need to talk to you about this lawsuit. What about it? I want you to know that I'm not part of it. I didn't know Patricia was planning to file anything until after she'd already done it. I'd remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation, he'd said, about the choices I made, about how I handled things with your stepmother and Veronica. You were right about everything you said. And I want to make this right. I've hired my own lawyer to file papers withdrawing from the lawsuit and affirming your sole ownership of the property. I'm also setting up a trust fund for you with money from my retirement accounts. Not a loan or a gift, but restitution for the inheritance money that was lost to legal fees when Patricia contested your grandmother's will. I'd been genuinely surprised. Why now? Because I finally realized that my daughter became a millionaire, and my first instinct was to figure out how it might benefit my wife. That's not who I want to be anymore. The conversation had lasted another hour, during which he'd apologized more sincerely than I'd ever heard him apologize for anything. We'd agreed to have dinner the following week, just the two of us, to start rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of obligation, which had left Patricia and Veronica to face the legal consequences of their greed alone. The hearing had been a masterclass in public humiliation. Jennifer Hawkins had systematically dismantled every aspect of their case, presenting documentation that proved beyond any doubt that my inheritance, land purchase, and mineral rights were all completely legitimate and legally unassailable. But the real devastation had come when she'd introduced evidence I'd spent months carefully collecting. Your Honor, Jennifer had said, addressing Judge Martinez, no relation to Veronica, thankfully. My client has provided documentation showing a pattern of financial manipulation and emotional abuse that directly contradicts the plaintiff's claims of being a supportive family unit. She'd presented bank records showing how Patricia had used family funds to pay for Veronica's expenses while refusing to contribute to my education costs. Email chains where Patricia had explicitly instructed extended family members not to include me in holiday celebrations or family events. Text messages where Veronica had bragged to friends about training the family's servant, referring to me. The most damning evidence had been a recording I'd made during my previous life, shortly before my death. I'd been cleaning out my childhood bedroom when I'd overheard Patricia and Veronica discussing my upcoming meeting with Dr. Reeves. She's been obsessing over that stupid land for weeks. Veronica's voice had come through clearly on the audio file. Something about gold deposits and geological surveys. It's pathetic how desperate she is to prove she's smart. Let her waste her money, Patricia had replied. Maybe losing everything will finally teach her some humility. God knows nothing else has worked. Do you think she'll actually go through with buying it? I hope she does. Watching her fail spectacularly might be worth the entertainment value. And when she comes crawling back, broke and humiliated, we can finally establish some proper boundaries about her place in this family. The courtroom had been dead silent as the recording played. I'd watched Patricia's face go white, seen Veronica's hands begin to shake. Your Honor, Jennifer had continued, this audio was recorded without the plaintiff's knowledge, which would normally make it inadmissible. However, it was recorded in my client's own childhood bedroom, in her own family home, making it legally permissible as evidence of the hostile environment she was subjected to. Judge Martinez had listened to the entire 40-minute recording, during which Patricia and Veronica had discussed their plans to put me in my place once my fantasy project inevitably failed. They'd talked about using my failure as leverage to force me to sign over power of attorney for my remaining inheritance. They'd even discussed having me declared mentally incompetent if I refused to be reasonable about family financial decisions. Furthermore, Jennifer had said, presenting another set of documents, the plaintiff's claim that they provided familial support is contradicted by testimony from multiple witnesses, including school counselors, teachers, and family friends, who documented my client's isolation and mistreatment over a period of 15 years. She'd called Mrs. Henderson, my high school guidance counselor, who testified that she'd repeatedly contacted my family about my obvious signs of stress and depression, only to be told by Patricia that I was overdramatic and seeking attention. She'd called Dr. Sarah Williams, my grandmother's physician, who testified that my grandmother had specifically mentioned her concerns about how I was being treated by my stepfamily. She told me that Maya was the only family member who visited her regularly, who remembered her birthday, who seemed to care about her as a person, rather than as a source of inheritance. She'd called Professor Janet Chen from my university, who testified that I'd been one of the most dedicated students she'd ever taught, often working multiple jobs while maintaining a perfect GPA, and that she'd written letters of recommendation that specifically mentioned my extraordinary resilience in the face of family challenges. By the time Jennifer had finished presenting evidence, Patricia and Veronica's case hadn't just been dismissed, it had been completely obliterated. But the judge hadn't stopped there. Not only is this lawsuit completely without merit, Judge Martinez had said, his voice cold with disapproval, but the evidence presented suggests that it was filed in bad faith as an attempt to extort money from the defendant through legal intimidation. He'd ordered Patricia and Veronica to pay all of my legal fees, plus additional sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. He'd also referred their case to the state bar for investigation of their attorney, who had apparently failed to perform due diligence before filing such an obviously baseless claim. The local newspaper had covered the hearing, and the story had quickly spread through social media. Within days, Patricia and Veronica had become viral symbols of family greed and manipulation. The internet had not been kind to them, but the real satisfaction had come in the months that followed, as I'd watched the consequences of their actions ripple through their lives like stones thrown into still water. Patricia's carefully cultivated reputation in local social circles had crumbled overnight. The country club had quietly asked her to resign her position on the charity board after several major donors had expressed concerns about her character issues. Her book club had suddenly found reasons why she was no longer welcome. Even her hairdresser had started booking her appointments at inconvenient times, a small but telling sign of how thoroughly she'd been ostracized. Veronica's problems had been more immediate and devastating. Her husband James had filed for divorce within 2 weeks of the hearing, citing her pattern of deceptive and manipulative behavior as evidence of irreconcilable differences. The divorce proceedings had revealed that she'd been hiding significant credit card debt from him, using family funds to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford while telling him they were just going through a temporary rough patch. Her social media presence, which had been carefully curated to project an image of effortless prosperity, had become a liability as internet users dug through years of posts documenting her extravagant spending and casual cruelty toward me. Screenshots of her calling me the family disappointment and joking about my pathetic attempts at independence had been shared thousands of times. The custody battle for her 2 children had been particularly brutal. James's lawyers had used her behavior during the lawsuit as evidence that she was an unfit mother, arguing that someone who would try to steal from her own sister couldn't be trusted with the welfare of children. While she'd ultimately retained joint custody, the proceedings had cost her most of her remaining assets and left her reputation in tatters. Meanwhile, my own life had transformed beyond anything I could have imagined. The mining operation with Meridian had proceeded flawlessly. Their environmental impact studies had been approved by all relevant agencies, and extraction had begun 6 months after the initial discovery. The first shipment of processed gold had been worth $12 million, with monthly shipments projected to continue for at least 5 years. I'd used part of the initial profits to establish the Helena Reeves Foundation for Geological Research, providing grants for graduate students and funding for mineral surveys in developing regions. Dr. Reeves had accepted the position of director, using her retirement to pursue the kind of comprehensive research she'd always dreamed of. I'd also purchased a beautiful Victorian house in the historic district, just a few miles from the property where I'd grown up, but worlds away in terms of the life I was building. The house had a library, a greenhouse, and a workshop where I could pursue my own geological research projects. But perhaps the most satisfying change had been in my relationship with my father. Our weekly dinners had evolved into genuine conversations about everything we'd both avoided discussing for years. He'd admitted that he'd been intimidated by Patricia's forceful personality, that he'd chosen the path of least resistance even when it meant neglecting his responsibilities to me. He'd acknowledged that his failure to protect me from emotional abuse had been inexcusable, regardless of his motivations. I told myself I was keeping the peace, he'd said during one particularly honest conversation. But the truth is, I was just being a coward. I was afraid that standing up to Patricia would mean losing another wife, and I chose my own comfort over my daughter's well being. In response, I'd shared some of the pain I'd carried for years, the feeling of being an outsider in my own family, the constant message that I wasn't worth defending, the way I'd learned to make myself smaller and quieter to avoid conflict. I spent so many years wondering what was wrong with me, I'd told him. Why wasn't I worth fighting for? Why did everyone else's feelings matter more than mine? There was never anything wrong with you, he'd replied, his voice thick with emotion. The failure was mine, completely and entirely mine. The healing process had been gradual and sometimes painful, but it had been real. We'd established new boundaries and new expectations for our relationship, based on mutual respect rather than old patterns of dysfunction. He'd also proven his commitment to change through his actions. When Patricia had tried to convince him to reconcile with her for the sake of family unity, he'd filed for divorce instead. When Veronica had asked him for money to help with her legal fees, he'd refused and suggested she get a job. I spent 15 years enabling their worst behavior, he'd explained to me. I'm not going to spend whatever time I have left making the same mistakes. The divorce proceedings had been swift and decisive. Patricia had tried to claim half of his assets, but the prenuptial agreement she'd insisted on years earlier had protected his retirement funds and business interests. She'd walked away with the house and her car, but none of the financial security she'd expected from their marriage. As I sat in my new library on a quiet Sunday morning, exactly 2 years after my family's disastrous attempt to steal my fortune, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed. The gold mine was producing steady profits that exceeded all initial projections. I'd invested the money wisely, diversifying into real estate, technology stocks, and renewable energy projects. My net worth had grown to over $40 million, with more coming in every month. But the financial success, as satisfying as it was, paled in comparison to the psychological victory I'd achieved. I'd broken the cycle of abuse that had defined my family for generations. I'd proven that victims don't have to remain victims, that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be destroyed by people who want to see you fail. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Maya Morrison, this is Detective Richards with the County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about Patricia Morrison. My stomach dropped. What about her? She was found dead in her apartment this morning, apparent suicide. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you. I sat in silence for a long moment, processing the information. Patricia was dead. The woman who'd spent 15 years making my life miserable, who'd tried to steal my fortune, who'd isolated me from my own family, was gone. And I felt nothing. No grief, no satisfaction, no relief. Just emptiness where I'd expected some kind of emotional response. Are you there, Miss Morrison? Yes, I'm here. What happened? She left a note. Among other things, it mentioned you specifically. She blamed you for ruining her life, for destroying her family, for taking away everything she'd worked for. Even in death, Patricia was trying to make her problems my fault. Detective, I need you to understand something. Patricia Morrison spent years abusing me emotionally and financially. When I became successful, she sued me in an attempt to steal my assets. The court found her lawsuit to be frivolous and sanctioned her for filing in bad faith. Her problems were the direct result of her own choices and actions. I understand. The note was extensive. She made a lot of accusations, but she also admitted to some things that, frankly, make her look like the villain in this situation. I just wanted to inform you because you're mentioned prominently and there might be some media attention. After hanging up, I sat quietly for another hour, waiting for some emotional response that never came. Patricia had been a destructive force in my life, but she'd also been a human being with her own pain and disappointments. Her death felt like the final chapter of a story that had already ended for me. The news coverage was predictably sensational. Gold rush greed, family lawsuit ends in tragedy, read the headline in the state newspaper. Social media erupted with hot takes about family loyalty, inherited wealth, and the dangers of greed. Some commenters blamed me for being heartless toward my grieving family. Others praised me for standing up to toxic relatives. Most seem to understand that Patricia's death was the inevitable conclusion of a life spent manipulating and exploiting others. Veronica called me the day after the funeral. Maya? Her voice was small and broken, nothing like the confident manipulation I remembered. I'm sorry for your loss, I said, and I meant it. Thank you. She was quiet for a long moment. I know things between us have been terrible. I know we've done terrible things to you, but she was still my mother. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not sure I understand any of this anymore. I look at my life now, divorced, broke, living in a studio apartment, working at a call center, and I can't figure out how everything went so wrong so fast. I could have pointed out that everything had gone wrong because she'd spent her entire adult life expecting other people to solve her problems while she contributed nothing of value. I could have reminded her of all the times she'd belittled me, manipulated me, tried to steal from me. Instead, I said, "What do you want from this conversation, Veronica?" I don't know, maybe I just wanted to hear your voice, to remember that you're still my sister, even after everything. Half-sister, I corrected gently. That was always very important to you. She started crying. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. For how we treated you, for the lawsuit, for all of it. I know it doesn't matter now, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. It does matter, I said, surprising myself. Apologies always matter, even when they can't fix anything. Is there any chance we could try again? Start over somehow? I considered the question seriously. Veronica had caused me years of pain, but she'd also been shaped by Patricia's influence from a young age. People could change if they were willing to do the work. If you're serious about changing, then maybe someday we can have some kind of relationship, I said finally. But it would have to be built on honesty and respect, not on family obligation or financial convenience. How do I prove that I'm serious? You live your life differently. You take responsibility for your choices and their consequences. You build something of value instead of trying to take what other people have built. And you never, ever try to manipulate me again. What if I fail? What if I can't change? Then you fail. But that's your choice to make. Just like it was your choice to treat me the way you did for all those years. The conversation ended with tentative plans to meet for coffee in a few months, after she'd had time to process her grief and figure out what kind of person she wanted to be. I hung up feeling cautiously optimistic, not about rebuilding our relationship, that might never be possible, but about the possibility that she might finally be ready to take responsibility for her own life. 6 months later, I received an invitation to Veronica's college graduation. She'd enrolled in a nursing program, working full-time during the day and attending classes at night. The invitation included a handwritten note. Maya, I know I don't deserve your support, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to become someone worthy of being your sister. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that people can change. Aunt Fee. I attended the graduation ceremony, sitting in the back and watching as she walked across the stage to receive her degree. She looked different, older, more tired, but also more genuine than I'd ever seen her. When she spotted me in the crowd afterward, she'd smiled and waved, but she hadn't tried to approach me or turn the moment into an emotional reconciliation scene. It was a small gesture, but it showed me that she was finally learning to respect boundaries. That evening, I sat in my greenhouse working on a geological survey for a potential new mining site in Colorado. The Helena Reeves Foundation had identified several promising locations for sustainable precious metal extraction, and I was consulting on the environmental impact assessments. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Proud of you for going today. Veronica told me what you said to her 6 months ago about building something of value. I think she's finally listening. I smiled and set the phone aside. Outside, the sun was setting over the Blackwood property, casting long shadows across the mining operation that had transformed my life. In the distance, I could see the lights of the town where I'd grown up, where I'd once been considered a worthless burden by my own family. Tomorrow, I would meet with architects about plans for a community center I was funding, designed to provide educational resources and job training for local residents. Next week, I would fly to Colorado to visit potential mining sites with Dr. Reeves and her team. Next month, I would celebrate the third anniversary of my cursed land purchase by breaking ground on a research facility that would study sustainable mining practices. I had built something extraordinary from the ashes of my family's cruelty. I had taken their poison and transformed it into medicine. I had refused to let their failures define my possibilities. And for the first time in either of my lifetimes, I was truly, completely, unshakably free. The gold they'd mocked had bought me more than financial security. It had bought me the power to choose who deserved access to my life, my energy, my love. It had bought me the freedom to forgive when forgiveness was earned and to walk away when it wasn't. Most importantly, it had taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction or retaliation. Sometimes the best revenge is simply building a life so beautiful, so successful, so authentically your own that your enemy's hatred becomes irrelevant. As I locked up the greenhouse and walked toward my house, I thought about the young woman I'd been in my first life, desperate for acceptance, willing to sacrifice her own well-being for the illusion of family harmony. She would have been amazed to see what I'd become, but she would have been even more amazed to discover that she'd had the strength to become this person all along. The gold had been buried under that cursed land for centuries, waiting for someone with enough determination to dig it up. Just like my own worth had been buried under years of abuse and manipulation, waiting for me to finally believe I deserved to claim it. The curse, it turned out, had never been on the land. Yeah. It had been on anyone foolish enough to believe that my family's poison could determine my destiny. And now, finally, that curse was broken.